Hey guys, welcome to the Way Wednesdays. Great to be with you. Gary should be here in just a minute. Sorry, we're starting a bit late. We had a few technical issues. We're trying to get it so that we can hear each other. We figured that's always a nice thing when we can hear each other, and it's a bummer when we can't. So I hope he will be joining us. Okay, there he is. Hey, nice.
All systems go.
All systems go. Sweet. All right, we did it, man. All right. Hey, happy Hanukkah, by the way.
Well, thank you, and happy Hanukkah to you as well, and the rest of everybody else out there. It's great to be able to celebrate the Festival of Lights. So many wonderful messages that come across through the Hanukkah celebration, and we get to tell a different story 8 nights in a row. So.
That's really true. Yeah, it's great. Jesus is the light of the world. You have this festival of lights. It's really a wonderful thing. You think about the people that went before us and how they sacrificed to be able to keep God's commandments. And I'll tell you, that is something that really hits me sometimes, how dedicated they were to keeping God's commandments, And, as we get into the story of Joseph, I think about he was a man that was tested and his faith was put on the line, and he could have taken some shortcuts down, along the way, especially when Potiphar's wife is going after him. That would have been very difficult, I think, for most men to resist, especially when you're a slave and you feel like you have no options and there's no hope that, a pretty woman's coming after you. To resist that is hard. And then, of course, his resisting, what did it do? It put him in jail. So, man, it went from bad to worse, but he was so committed to living for God's word that he would not commit that sin. And because of his faithfulness, he eventually got to be the number 2 guy in all of Egypt.
Yeah, it is really a testament to what it means to go through a trial and have patience and perseverance through the trial, not really even seeing that there's going to be any good outcome at all. I mean, he was in jail, like 10 years or so?
13 altogether when you add it up.
Yeah. So it's like, that's crazy. And, you just kind of wonder, has God abandoned me?
Yep.
But he always hung in there. I mean, he always knew that. You stand by your principle. You stand by your faith. And regardless of the outcome, I mean, he may not have ever been let out of jail, and yet he would have stayed true the entire time.
Yeah.
It's
that amazing?
Great story.
Yeah. And I like the word principles, because I think sometimes we can kind of get lost between the forest and the trees type thing when we jump into Torah, especially for a lot of Christians who are coming from a non-Torah based observance of the faith to now coming into Torah. You get this sense that there's so many laws I have to keep, and I don't know how I'm going to possibly do this. But think about the principles. Really, there's one big principle: love. All right, that's the first big principle. That's the biggest. Then that divides into 2: love God, love your neighbor. Okay, I'm tracking with this, right? What does it mean to love God? Well, don't take his name in vain. Don't have other gods before him. Don't make graven images. Keep the Sabbath. Those are the things God says to keep. Honor your father and your mother. And then what does it mean to love your neighbor? Well, don't murder the guy. That should be, like really simple and easy. Don't bear false witness against him. Don't steal his wife. Don't rob him, and don't covet his stuff, right? So these are the basics of what it means to love. So we're still on that same principle, though. And then based on this principle, then we say, okay, well, let's flesh it out a little bit more. Let's take murder. How does murder fit in? What about kidnapping? Well, that's equivalent to murder as far as the Bible is concerned. But again, it goes back to the principle of love. If you love your neighbor, you're not going to kidnap him or somebody that belongs to him. You're not going to kidnap that person because you love your neighbor. And so that is the principle that we stand on, and that's what we always have to go back to when we're thinking about how to keep God's commandments.
Even when you're not loved back.
Wow.
or things turn against you. I mean, that's
Yeah.
when it really gets tough
Yeah. Yes.
to be able to do these things, or
Yep.
your welfare or the welfare of your family's in jeopardy and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. I mean, some tests get
Right.
trials. I I pray that I would be able to withstand them, and I
Yeah.
thank God that I have not been forced to make really, really difficult decisions in my life, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that's often true of many of us who live in the U.S. Or in first world countries and things like that. That we really haven't been tested. We really haven't had trials,
Mm-hmm.
and we really don't. Honestly, how you have to question how would we stand up in the
Mm-hmm.
event of a Joseph scenario, or
Mm-hmm.
we see contemporary day martyrs and people
Mm-hmm.
who live in countries where persecution is rampant,
Yep.
and they have to make very, very difficult choices. Um, I thank God that He's kept most of us, here from that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I fear that it's kind of create marshmallow faith, uh, where everything's kind
Yeah.
of nice and
Yeah.
cushy and cozy and sweet all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And
Well,
then
you went into the Navy, and I suppose the Navy is not as difficult as the Marines, but still you had to go through boot camp, right? You were tested, right? You were tested to see your mettle. Like, how are you gonna do under stress? And that's how that they know that you're ready for a combat position,
hmm
because
hmm
they've tested you. And
yeah,
I think that's, just a important thing. And there's really no escaping it, right? There's no getting around boot camp. You have
right.
to go through it, right? Because
Well,
then you've been tested.
and one of the things that I really appreciate now from my time in the military, which, albeit was very short, I did my 4 years and I thought, this isn't the life for me as I got out and went into the private sector. But throughout the military, there are always drills, there are always scenarios, there are always tests. There's that sharpen your skill, that make sure you know that how you're going to react, that you know what you're supposed to know, that you can cover your shipmates back, that you operate as a team. And some of these things are really essential in terms of being able to apply it to the body of Messiah. And then
Hmm.
to be able to do it without even thinking about it. It just
Yep.
happens automatically
Yep.
because that is your nature. And that's the nature that Messiah wants us to take on. A
Hmm.
nature so that it is automatic, so that it is so ingrained in us that it's like, of course, I don't even think about compromise. Of course, I don't even think,
Right.
this is not a trial. This is the enemy coming against me, and I know it.
Yep.
I
Yep.
recognize it, and I'm responding appropriately.
Exactly. So a lot of you guys know that I started taking Krav Maga 3.5 years ago, and it's really been a wonderful experience. It's been a very difficult experience, but it has taught me so much. And principles is one of the things that we talk about a lot, right? So we talk about the principles. Krav Maga is much less about having exact tactics, but having the principles of what you do in a certain situation. And the tests that we have to take for our different levels are incredibly intensive. So my yellow belt was 2 hours, my orange belt was 3 hours, and the green belt that I should have taken a couple weeks ago, but COVID struck. And anyway, that's going to be 4 hours. And that, I was not looking forward to it by any means, right? Because it's going to be hard. But I know that once I've gotten through it, I love the fruit. The fruit is good. The test is hard, but the fruit is good, because then I know that I've been tested under stress. They're trying to see not just that I know the moves, but that I know the moves under stress. And that really is the difference, because when you're under stress, and Gary, I'm sure you can attest to this as well, but when you're under stress, this thing right here, this prefrontal cortex, it just kind of shuts down. And actually what happens is most of the blood goes to your amygdala, because your amygdala is a thing that it's tied to your subconscious, and it acts incredibly quickly, like a million times faster than your prefrontal cortex. So your prefrontal cortex is where you do your cognitive thinking, right? It's where you do your deep thoughts, right? But the things that come automatically are in your subconscious. And when you're under stress, this thing doesn't work anymore, okay? That prefrontal cortex is just gone. So whatever you have programmed in your subconscious mind, that is going to come out. And that's really what we're talking about when we talk about having this, the Torah in our hearts and in our minds, that it's not just thoughts up here, it's not just ideas that we're thinking about, but it's now so ingrained, so etched in our person, in our hearts is what we'd call it, right? You know something by heart, and you know it so much that you know it, you don't even think about knowing it. You're able to do it without thinking about it when the situation arises. And that's what we're talking about. And that's what I see in the life of Joseph, and to some degree in the lives of the Maccabees, etc.
And just a word for folks that are new to kind of the Torah way of life. We're looking at the entirety of the scripture and applying your life to that. One of the things that I really appreciated when I was early on in my walk, following after the principles of the Torah, was that throughout the day, I called it a consciousness of godly things, because you end up making choices about the way you pray. You make choices about the things that you eat. You make choices about preparing for the end of the week coming up, that I didn't find that I had that same level of consciousness in my walk before I started into a Torah lifestyle. So, it was like, okay, well, I'll eat whatever is set before me or whatever I want. I don't have to make, decisions about the way I shop. I can just shop for anything. Sunday, getting ready for Sunday worship was making sure I had clean clothes on Sunday morning. It wasn't getting ready the night before. And so that was one of the things that I really noticed first on in my walk in Torah. And now, of course, those things have become part of my way of life, and they become much more automatic, and where I don't even necessarily think of them. And Doug, you and I have had this conversation multiple times about, what do the disciples think about living a Torah lifestyle? Well, they didn't. It was just,
Exactly.
it was just the way they lived.
Right.
And when you move beyond this, I'm trying to do this, to I'm doing this, to
Right.
this is the way I live, you can really see how it becomes part of your life, and
Yeah.
and then you reflect on it and you say, and this is the way that God tells me how I should live. And
Right.
you really do find, I personally, a fulfilling aspect to that. And,
Yeah.
and knowing that I'm following the book. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
wow. And it's not difficult, and it's not
Right.
arduous, and
That's
it's
right.
not like I really have to strive at it, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
what am I going to do today? It just becomes second nature.
Yep. And really, we're talking about culture. We're talking about God's culture. We want that ingrained in us. And if you've ever been to a foreign country, especially your first time going to a foreign country, you're hit with something called culture shock, right? Because you're suddenly exposed to a very different way of living. You're like, wait, why do people do that? Everybody knows that we do it this way, right? But then you're like, oh, these people do it because that's their culture. Not always bad, right? Doesn't mean your culture is always better. It's just sometimes there's differences in culture. But God is giving us his culture. He says, do it this way. This is how I want you to do it. The stuff you're going to eat, this is the culture I'm giving you. The stuff you buy, this is the culture I'm giving you. The stuff you watch and you do and you say, this is the culture. The things on your calendar, here's my culture. Follow this, and then we will have something to talk about. And then when somebody does something different, you'll have a culture shock. You're like, wait, why are you doing that? I mean, God told us to do it this way. I just thought we did it this way, but now I see you're doing it this way. So then you have to, it's an opportunity to talk to people and to share the faith you have, of course.
which of course is a great time to talk about the culture that we're going to experience in April of 2021, and our trip to
Shameless
Israel.
plug.
And if you haven't,
Yeah.
if you haven't heard about this, know that there is a discount deadline that is running out at the end of this month. So if you're at all interested in signing up, make your deposit before the end of this month and you'll save yourself a couple $100. And it's definitely worth it. I remember, culturally speaking, the first time I went, and they have this lavish spreads of food that will are part of the tour. And I remember going to my first Israeli breakfast, and it's like, well, there's fish and cheese and breads and yogurt and things like that. And it's like, well, where's the eggs and where the, I thought, well, I did have them, but it's like, what?
Yeah.
People eat fish for breakfast?
Uh-huh.
And boy, I tell you now, I can't wait to get back and say,
Uh-huh.
open it, have some of that white fish. Oh,
Yep.
the smoked herring. Oh my gosh, on a bagel. Oh, I can't wait. Take me back there.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Of
Sign
course,
up.
that
Go
was
to
the
website.
hotel. Not everybody eats that richly every day. Well, hey, let's get in the text.
Let's do it.
This is an amazing text. All right, so then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. Suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up out after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine-looking cows and fat cows. So Pharaoh awoke, and he slept and dreamed a second time. And suddenly 7 grains of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called out for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. Then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh and said, I remember my faults this day, when Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker. We each had a dream in one night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now here was a young Hebrew man with us there, a servant of the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he interpreted according to his own dream. And it came to pass, just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me to my office, and he hanged him. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon. And he shaved, changed his clothing, and came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there was no one who can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that you can interpret a dream to interpret it. You understand a dream to interpret it. So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, in my dream I stood on the bank of the river. Suddenly 7 cows came up out of the river, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and ugly, very ugly and gaunt, such ugliness as I have never seen in all the land of Egypt. And the gaunt and ugly cows ate up the first 7, the fat cows. When they had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as ugly as at the beginning. So I woke. Also I saw in my dream, and suddenly 7 heads came up on one stalk, full and good. And then behold, 7 heads withered, thin and blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the thin heads devoured the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are one. And the 7 thin and ugly cows which came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them, 7 years of famine will arise, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will deplete the land. So the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following, for it will be very severe. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice, because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land in the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of those good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep good food in the cities. Then that food shall be as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all of his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a man as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and he clothed him in the garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried out before him, bow the knee. So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, behold, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath Padpaneah, and he gave him a wife, Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. Now in the 7 plentiful years, the ground brought forth abundantly. So he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities. He laid up in every city the food of the fields which surrounded them. Joseph gathered very much grain, as the sand of the sea, until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable. And to Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. And the name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Then the 7 years of plenty which were in the land of Egypt ended, and the 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph had said. The famine was in all the land, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Then Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph, whatever he says to you, do. The famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine became severe in the land of Egypt. So all countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe in all the lands. All right. Whew, that's a lot. There's a lot in there. Man, isn't that just an amazing story? I just love that.
The part that I like the best is that how the Joseph was identified to Pharaoh. It's like, oh, there was a Hebrew. And it's like, I wonder how people would recognize me. It's like, oh, there's this dude that lives down there. There's this Christian guy. It's like, how are we recognized? How do we want to be recognized? How well can we be recognized? And the slaves, obviously, or not the slaves, but the servants of Pharaoh spent a fair amount of time with Joseph, got to get to know him a little bit. But again, sitting in these trials, kind of like what we started out talking about, in prison, it's pretty easy to sit there and commiserate. I got the so and so, everything's against me, and here I'm unjustly sitting here, and there's nothing good in my life, and this and that. That's not the impression that I get. They definitely identified him as a Hebrew, and Hebrews must have been recognized as somebody who believed in one God, in an invisible God, and they didn't have a pantheon of gods. I don't know exactly what the Egyptians thought that Hebrews were, but they definitely recognized him as that. And then the second thing is Pharaoh recognizes him. He recognizes that he is filled with the Spirit of God. Is there any like this who is filled with the Spirit of God? And he knew that he was different. He knew that he was distinct. He knew that there was something special about Joseph. Not that he could just, tell that what the dreams were about, or come up with a good line, but that it was authentic. And I think that's what is worth striving for, to be seen as an authentic believer. Because I think that comes through in your nature and in your walk.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about what you're saying about the identity. I mean, it could be that there were some differences of melatonin in the skin, and just all this different stuff. So the appearance could be that, well, he looks different. But sometimes people can look different but be of the same culture. So I suspect that it was not just the looks, but it was the culture that set him apart, that people understood that he wasn't to do that. He wasn't going to be the same. And I think about Daniel and his friends. They had a kind of a similar situation, right? Here's a king that has a dream and he wants an interpretation. And the difference, of course, is that Nebuchadnezzar was not willing to tell people what his dream was. He's like, you tell me what my dream was if you're so smart. And so then Daniel had to pray about that. He went and, he asked for a night to pray. And so then he went to the king and says, okay, now, God has the interpretation. So I really appreciate how quickly Joseph is to ascribe the power to God. And, this is, I think, where we have this constant struggle back and forth in our lives as believers. We know that God's power is out there, but we are so reticent to take hold of it. But I don't see Joseph being apologetic about God's power, but he was quick to ascribe the origin of that power. When you think about all the miracles that have happened in the Bible, when Moses parted the waters of the Red Sea, it was a collaboration between God and Moses, right? God could have just done it himself, but as he's crying, as Moses is crying out, God says, what are you crying to me for? You got the staff in your hand, go for it, right? I already appointed you, so go for it. Stop whining and just go do this. And so then when the waters split, it wasn't Moses' power that made that happen. It was God's power, but it was being channeled through Moses' faith. When Peter was walking on water, it wasn't Peter's power, it was God's power that made that happen, but it was being channeled through Peter's faith. And so here we have Joseph, who just seems to expect that God is going to interpret the dream, that God is going to give the interpretation. He doesn't even flinch. He's like, well, I got to pray about this. Let me go fast and pray. I mean, you guys kind of, sprang this on me pretty quick here. I need a moment to get ready. He's ready. This guy is ready. He doesn't know what's coming. He doesn't know that Pharaoh has a dream. He's just, he's yanked out of his prison, given a shower. And then here he's in front of Pharaoh and he's like, whoa, okay. And but he's ready to go. And I think that's what we were talking about, is this culture thing, that it's become so ingrained in you that he has been walking with God, whether as a slave, as a prisoner. He has been having that quiet time, quite literally, probably. He had a lot of time to meditate on God. And as he's being tested day after day, his faith is only getting stronger. And he remembers the dreams that got him in trouble with his brothers in the first place, right? So he's like, look, I know that my life, whatever may happen, something amazing is going to happen. And this is not the end, right? So he has absolute faith that God is going to do what he said he's going to do. And, again, that is just an incredible thing, that God does these works, and it's so exciting to see.
And I think it's a really key point that you bring out, is that his prayer, if he had a prayer, I'm sure he did while he was in prison, was, not, bring justice to the ones who falsely accuse me. It's not, release me from these chains. That there was a much bigger purpose at work, that he had to kind of serve his time and wait out to have materialize before him. But ultimately, it was not just to be released, not just to be vindicated, but to be made like second in command behind Pharaoh, to ultimately save his people, his family, to be reunited with his brothers and his father. How could you possibly foresee that? But knowing that God has a purpose for each one of us, that may not be readily apparent to us. And how many times do we pray amiss, seeking kind of like a short-term solution? It's like, get me out of this pickle, or,
Yep.
I really don't like this situation, or, I want a better job. I don't want to, put in my 40 hours doing this for the next 15 years. When that may be what he's got in store for you, so that you'll have an opportunity, what he really has, set before you, that that we may not see, or we may not even be open to. It really is remarkable.
Perseverance. That's the name of the game. And that's what we were talking about, at before, is just hanging in there, right? Being tested, and he was certainly tested. All right, well, our next portion here, Genesis 42. When Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" And he said, "Indeed, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down to that place and buy for us there, and that we may live and not die." So Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, "Lest some calamity befall him." And the sons of Israel went to buy grain among those who journeyed, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was governor over the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he acted as a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. Then he said to them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan, to buy food." So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Then Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed about them, and he said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land." And they said to him, "No, my lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We are all one man's sons. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies." But he said to them, "No, you have come to see the nakedness of the land." And they said, "Your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And in fact, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more." But Joseph said to them, "It is as I spoke to you, saying you are spies. In this manner you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not leave this place unless your younger brother comes here. Send one of you, and let him bring your brother, and you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested to see whether there is any truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies." So he put them all together in prison 3 days. Then Joseph said to them the third day, "Do this and live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers be confined to your prison house, but you go and carry grain for the famine of your houses, and bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified, and you shall not die." And they did so. Then they said to one another, "We are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. Therefore this distress has come upon us." And Reuben answered them, saying, "Did I not speak to you, saying, 'Do not sin against the boy'? And you would not listen. Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us." But they did not know that Joseph understood them, for he spoke to them through an interpreter. And he turned himself away from them and wept. Then he returned to them again and talked with them. And he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. Then Joseph gave a command to fill the sacks with grain, to restore every man's money to his sack, and to give his provisions for the journey. Thus he did for them. So they loaded their donkeys with the grain and departed from there. But as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey feed in the encampment, he saw his money, and there it was in the mouth of his sack. So he said to his brothers, "My money has been restored, and there it is in my sack." Then their hearts failed them, and they were afraid, saying to one another, "What is this that God has done to us? Then they went to Jacob their father in the land of Canaan and told him all that had happened to them, saying, the man who was in the Lord of this land spoke roughly to us and took us for spies of the country. But we said to him, we are honest men, not spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of our father, and one is no more. The youngest is with our father this day in the land of Canaan. Then the man, the Lord of the country, said to us, by this I will know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me. Take food for the famine for your households and be gone. And bring your youngest brother to me, so I shall know that you are not spies, but that you are honest men. I will grant your brother to you, that you may trade in the land. Then it happened as they emptied their sacks that surprisingly each man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob, their father, said to them, you have bereaved me. Joseph is no more, Simeon is no more, and you want to take Benjamin. All these things are against me. Then Reuben spoke to his father, saying, kill my 2 sons, if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you. But he said, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. If any calamity should befall him along the way in which you go, then you would bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave. Wow, Gary. Man, I'll tell you, this story always gets me. It's just such a mover and shaker here. But, I just keep seeing these guys, what you sow is what you will reap. I just cannot say that enough. That principle is throughout Scripture. Sometimes it's spelled out for us, right? Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. What a man sows, that he shall reap. And we see that theme again and again and again and again throughout Scripture. And here it is. We see it in the life of Jacob. Jacob, the one who swindled his brother, right? And so then he got taken, and then, he had lots of trials. And then we look at Simeon, right? Simeon and Levi, who used deception to kill everybody in Shechem. And of course, now Simeon is the one who's being withheld. I'm sure Joseph thought about, let's see, who is the roughest of my brothers and likes killing people, right? Who actually could use a little time in jail here, Then you got Reuben shooting off his mouth. Kill my 2 sons if I don't bring back your son. Like, that's going to help. Here, kill your grandsons if I don't bring your son back. I mean, what kind of logic is that? I understand that he's, trying to be magnanimous, but he blew it because he went to his father's bed. And so now he has no authority. He has no standing in the clan because he completely usurped his father's authority. And so now what we're seeing is the days of our lives. I mean, this is a soap opera. If there ever was a soap opera, this is it. We should not think that the Bible is just prim and proper and, it's just so wonderful. What I love about the Bible is it's giving us all the dirty laundry. I've read a lot of ancient texts, and the difference between the Bible and those ancient texts that talk about their gods and their heroes is they talk about their gods and their heroes, right? And yeah, the hero has some problems, but he's always amazing. He always overcomes. And the gods, we hear about their grandeur and their glory. But we don't see that act of love, and we certainly don't get all of the dirty laundry. But we get the family's dirty laundry throughout the Bible, which should tell us something. That the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is not afraid to get his hands dirty, right? He's not afraid to change a diaper. He's not afraid to interact with us, creatures of dust who have problems galore, who are just a big soap opera in the making. God's like, I know, but you know what? I love you anyway. That's what blows my mind.
And the hope that I get from all of this is that these are ordinary people that make the same tragic mistakes that we make in our lives over and over and over again. And God is faithful to redeem them, to rescue them, to shelter them, to protect them, to sometimes punish and admonish them. But he doesn't abandon them. Despite their inadequacies or frailties, our inadequacies, our frailties, the mistakes that we make, which are just as magnanimous as the ones that Jacob and sons put together and made. I can only imagine the soul searching that went on in that family as they're scrambling, wondering, it's like, what is going on? How are we going to survive the famine? Of course, that's a huge trial. How are we going to sustain ourselves? We see people today with that, people that have been out of work, people that are in food lines that have never been in there before, people that just don't know where their next rent check is coming from. And there's a lot of soul searching that is going on. And in those trying times, in those soul searching times, it's best that you find your soul and not turn away.
Oh, well said.
And it is, ultimately you got to face the music, and how you face that music determines your character, and determines how God is going to continue to use you in your life, or how you are going to associate yourself with Him. And this story could have gone so many different ways, but there is definitely a lot of angst in the camp of Jacob and sons going on now, as they have to make decisions on what to do with Benjamin, going back, hoping they can get Simeon out of the clink, and ultimately all they want is some grain, and
that's right.
So much more is going to happen, and it's going to be, and they have no idea of the glory that awaits them.
That's right. That's
amazing.
Beautiful. Yeah, that'll preach, brother. That'll preach, man. I was thinking about your comment on soul searching. I think sometimes we find ourselves in a situation kind of like this family, right? There's a famine. That was not their fault, right? They had nothing to do with that. That just happened. Okay. So let's call that circumstances of life, that things happen. I don't know. The stock market, the whole stock market crashes. Like, that wasn't your fault. Okay. And that does a whole bunch of stuff. But I think sometimes we are so quick to say it's all the devil's fault, right? That it's all his fault. He's behind all this. He's got his machinations. And look, I completely believe that Satan's doing lots of, nasty stuff. All right. But we've got to be careful, because as you were talking about that, Gary, this soul searching, that there is this sense, and these guys recognize it. We're in this trouble right now because of what we did to our brother. And that's the sowing and reaping. And, there's sometimes when, somebody will say something really insensitive to me, and, it hurts, but I'll be like, I might deserve that, because maybe not from that person, but maybe I dished it out. Maybe I gave to somebody, in years past, I did something very similar to that. And now I'm just getting what I gave. And, and so it gives me a moment to pause and to reflect and say, you know what, Lord, I thank you for your faithfulness. I thank you that you are so kind and patient with me, that I was being stupid, 10, 20 years ago, doing whatever. And now, it's coming back, and I'm kind of getting what I gave out. But I thank you that, you're using this to teach me and to instruct me and to do some soul searching, so that now that I'm in this time of crisis and these things are happening, I can either whine about it and complain and say, this is so unfair, or I can say, thank you, Lord. Thank you that you're faithful, and the things that I sowed and I'm now reaping. But I thank you that you can take what the locusts have eaten, and you can restore even that. You can take my stupid, dumb, idiotic episodes where I was dishing it out, and now I'm getting it back. But you can take that and you can use it and you can restore it and redeem it. And it's not a waste. God's not trying to just randomly punish us. But let's understand, what you sow is what you will reap. That is a law. It does not change. There's no getting around that. We see it from Genesis to Revelation. It's all throughout Scripture. So don't think you're going to short circuit that. Don't think that because Jesus died for your sins that law doesn't apply to you. It applies to you. Trust me. But when you're in Christ, he will take those situations and he can use them and transform them. If your heart is soft, if you'll humble yourself and say, yeah, I blew it. And you know what? This situation now is making me think about what I did 10, 20 years ago. And I thank you that you've been so faithful. And so, yeah, I repent again if I haven't already. And I pray that you just help me gain wisdom through this situation.
Geez, you make me feel like I should apologize for all the snide remarks I make to you all the time. I'll think about that. Yeah, you
think about that. I'm making a list, man. All right. Chapter 43. We're making our way here. This is good. All right. Now the famine was severe in the land, and it came to pass when they had eaten up the grain, which they had brought from Egypt, that their fathers said to them, "Go back, buy us a little food." But Judah spoke to him, saying, "The man solemnly warned us, saying, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you send our brother with us, we will go down and buy you food. But if you will not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you." And Israel said, "Why did you deal so wrongfully with me, as to tell the man whether you had still another brother?" But they said, "The man asked us pointedly about ourselves and our family, saying, is your father still alive? Have you another brother?" And we told him according to these words. Could we possibly have known that he would say, "Bring your brother down"? Then Judah said to Israel his father, "Send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. I myself will be surety for him. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. For if we had not lingered, surely by now we would have returned this second time." And their father Israel said to them, "If it must be so, then do this. Take some of the best fruits of the land in your vessels and carry them down, a present for the man, a little balm, a little honey, spices and myrrh, pistachio nuts and almonds. Take double money in your hand, and take back in your hand the money that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. Take also your brother, and arise, go back to the man. And may God Almighty give you mercy before the man, that he may release your other brother and Benjamin. If I am bereaved, I'm bereaved." So the men took that present and Benjamin, and they took double money in their hand. And they rose and went down to Egypt, and they stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, "Take these men to my home, and slaughter an animal, and make ready, for these men will dine with me at noon." Then the man did as Joseph ordered, and the man brought the men into Joseph's house. Now the men were afraid because they were brought into Joseph's house, and they said, "It is because of the money which was returned in our sacks the first time that we are brought in, so that he may make a case against us and seize us to take us as slaves with our donkeys." When they drew near to the steward of Joseph's house, they talked with him at the door of the house and said, "Oh, sir, we indeed came down the first time to buy food. But it happened when we came to the encampment that we opened our sacks, and there in each man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight. So we have brought it back in our hand. And we have brought down other money in our hands to buy food. We do not know who put our money in our sacks." But he said, "Peace be with you. Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money." Then he brought Simeon out to them. So the man brought the men into Joseph's house and gave them water, and they washed their feet, and he gave their donkeys feed. Then they made the present ready for Joseph's coming at noon, for they heard that they would eat bread there. And when Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in the hand into the house, and bowed down before him to the earth. Then he asked them about their well-being and said, "Is your father well? The old man of whom you spoke, is he still alive?" And they answered, your servant, our father, is in good health. He is still alive." And they bowed their heads down and prostrated themselves. And then he lifted his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your younger brother of whom you spoke to me?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Now his heart yearned for his brother. So Joseph made haste and sought somewhere to weep. And he went into his chamber and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out and restrained himself and said, serve the bread. So they set him a place by himself and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with them by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat food with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. And they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked in astonishment at one another. Then he took servings to them from before him, but Benjamin's serving was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So they drank and were merry with him. Wow. Again, it's it's amazing. I mean, you're seeing character development right before our eyes, right? So they've got double the money and they're like, uh-oh, we had better come clean. We better be preemptive in this situation. And if we're not, it could go bad for us. I think that's a great lesson, to be preemptive. You know, there's always that thing sometimes when you're at the grocery store and the cashier gives you too much change back. Does that ever happen these days? Years ago when we had cash, yes. But, you know, if that happens, you know, you understand that that person will have to make up the difference if you don't give the money back, right? They're going to be on the line for that difference. So, you know, you give the money back. That's just a super simple example, but that's probably something a lot of us have experienced from one time or another. To just be honest in our dealings. And, you know, these guys are claiming to be honest, and yet they have double the money. So now they're like, uh-oh, we better make good on this, you know? And of course, you know, then Joseph comes, but yeah.
And I think oftentimes we get to that point when everything else has been stripped away and we have nothing left but the truth of our situation.
Yeah.
But sadly, that's what has to happen. We got to strip away every barrier that we put up, every conniving tactic or strategy that we have to try to, you know, show the best face or get the best outcome for ourselves. When all that stuff gets stripped away, and all you have to do is stand upon, look at this is just me. This what you see is what you get, and you know, I have nothing else to fall upon other than your mercy. And that's how oftentimes that's how we come to God, right? We come to God at our lowest moment when we've tried everything humanly possible to solve problems on our own. And again, that's kind of one of the problems with the, you know, being the marshmallows that we get to be here in the United States, is we don't have real trials. We have too much comfort. You know, I like comfort. I don't want to give up any comfort.
Right.
But it makes me question, you know, how authentic am I? And that's where we see these guys. It's like all of a sudden, this is,
wow.
You know, we're not just on a food mission.
Yeah.
We're here for our lives now.
Yeah. Wow. They're being tested, and the question is, who are they really? Authentic. That's a great word, Gary. That's a very good word. And isn't that really the question? I mean, this is what Peter says, right? That we should rejoice for the testing of our faith, because that is revealing who we are, right? It's getting rid of the dross. You know, when you have gold and you smelt it, and then the impurities all go to the top. That's what these fiery trials are all about. And there's no way to get the impurities out of the gold except by putting it in the fire. There's no way to change character except by going through the fire. That's the only way. There is no shortcut. And I appreciate your comment that, I like comfort, and I'm not looking to be a martyr anytime soon. And I also wonder, how would I do if I were tested in the way that other people have been tested? You know, it's easy to talk. Boy, it's easy to talk. Oh, I would do great. I would never give in to that kind of stuff. You know, that's what I think I would do. That's what I think I would do. That's what I hope I would do. That's my conviction now. when life is easy, but what would my conviction be when life is hard, right? What would my conviction be when it's going to cost me? Thinking about Hanukkah, we saw their conviction. We saw their authenticity. That, there's a story in Second Maccabees where this mother and her 7 sons, I mean, this is a classic story, are told to just take a little pinch of incense and just offer it to the gods. That's all you got to do and you'll save your life. They're like, we're not doing it. We're not doing it. And so this mother sees her 7 sons brutally killed, tortured, and then killed. I mean, they're literally sliced and diced before her and put into pans, like a kid gets a hand cut off and then they throw it into a big cauldron, and then they cut him up limb by limb, and they do that to all 7 of her sons and finally the mother. And she's just encouraging her sons, don't give in, my son, hang in there. This is but a short test, and we will be in God's presence, and we will be in his kingdom, right? Where there's glories forever and pleasures forever and all that stuff. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Would I do the same thing? I don't know. I can't tell you because I've never been tested. I would like to think that I would do that. That's my goal, so that if that should ever happen, that I'm going to perform as well as that lady and her sons, or whatever the test may be, that I'm going to go through it. But that's why God takes us, step by step, test by test, right? You don't going into medical school, you take a easier test, and when you finish medical school, that's a harder test, because now you should be ready for that test. And that's what we see in the life of Joseph and these guys, and the life of Abraham, etc.
And I think that takes us back to kind of where we started, is the idea of, and why we read these stories. So and we identify the application to our lives, so that as we read these stories, because we don't live these circumstances, but we can read the stories and we can visualize through our mind what happens when if we're confronted with that. Mm-hmm. And it's like the military drill. It's like, okay, this is not we're not really going to launch the missiles. We're not really having a flood. There's not really a fire in this compartment, but we're going to go through the steps just as if it were. It's like reading the story. And so reading through these stories, it makes us at least mentally think through how we would respond. And just doing that and going through these stories year after year after year, and making the word a constant part of our lives. When the test comes, there's a seed of that truth in us that should bring out our authentic person. I had a textual question for you here. So the chapter starts out and it talks about Jacob, and then it shifts into, and Israel did this, and Israel said that. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, I mean, I don't know that I have the answer, but my thinking is that, Israel, we saw that his name was changed when he wrestled with God. And debates about what that means. Does it mean ruled by God, governed by God, or does it mean to wrestle with God? Does it mean both, right? I think that's at least a possibility. So, I don't know, but I get this sense that there's a very deliberate change there, that the author is letting us know this is a moment where he's wrestling with God. That's what I would suggest. He's being governed by God, but it sure hurts right now. It really hurts. And we're seeing that he's being tested as badly as he was tested with that angel of the Lord that night. He's now being tested, right? I mean, this is, if we're kind of writing a story on the hero's journey type style, this is where the climax for Jacob, this is the climax, right? Because this is everything is lost, right? The brothers will have theirs a little bit later, but for him, this is the everything is lost moment. Everything he cares about, it seems lost to him. You know, how could you take my son, Benjamin, the only son that I have left of my beloved wife, and now you're going to take her? If I'm bereaved, I'm bereaved, right? And now we're seeing Judah. Now Judah is stepping up. He is finally getting it. He's not being stupid like his brother Reuben. Oh yeah, kill my sons if I don't come back, Dad. No, he's not going to say that. That's ridiculous. But he's like, I will be responsible. And I love that. I love that Judah is now going to be the responsible one for his little brother, right? He is going to step in. He will kind of be that redeemer. And we're going to see that when we finally get to that place where when before Joseph reveals himself and he says, you're all going to be slaves, or just your brother, Judah says, no, take my life instead of my brother. Oh, that's a beautiful picture. Man, I mean, isn't that just another picture of Christ? That Yeshua says, I will take the place of my brother. I will take his place. And you can do what you want with me, but let him go. And that's what Jesus did for us, is he said, take me and not the little brother. It's a beautiful picture. It's just incredible. Well, hey, we've got 17 verses. I bet we could do it. We are so close. This is exciting.
Go for it.
And he commanded the steward of his house, saying, fill the men's sacks with food as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of his sack. Also put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, and his grain money. So he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. As soon as the morning dawned, the men were sent away, they and their donkeys. When they had gone out of the city and were not far off, Joseph said to the steward, get up, follow the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, why have you repaid evil for good? Is this not the one which my Lord drinks, from which my Lord drinks, and with which he indeed practices divination? You have done evil in doing so, and so doing. So he overtook them, and he spoke to them these same words. And they said to him, why does my Lord say these words? Far be it from us that your servants should do such a thing. Look, we brought back to you from the land of Canaan the money which we found in the mouth of our sacks. How then could we steal silver or gold from your Lord's house? With whomever of your servants it is found, let him die, and we also will be my Lord's slaves. And he said, now also let it be according to your words. He with whom it is found shall be my slave, and you shall be blameless. Then each man speedily let down his sack to the ground, and each man opened his sack. So he searched. He began with the oldest and left off with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Then they tore their clothes, and each man loaded his donkey and returned to the city. So Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, and he was still there, and they fell before him on the ground. And Joseph said to them, what deed is this you have done? Did you not know that such a man as I can certainly practice divination? Then Judah said, what shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of your servants. Here we are, my Lord's slaves, both we and he also with whom with whom the cup was found. But he said, far be it from me that I should do so. The man in whose hand the cup was found, he shall be my slave. And as for you, go up in peace to your father. All right. Well, that's the end. I mean, that is the end of this parasha. Talk about a cliffhanger. Gary.
Cliffhanger. Wow. What's going to happen?
I'm on pins and needles, man. I'm just like, oh no.
We got to save it for next week. We got to have something to come back to.
Indeed.
Which I want to just ask anybody who's online that's watching this that enjoys the Midrash. We enjoy these times so much, Doug and I together, and we pray that you enjoy them as well. And if you do, we want to ask you to like this, not so that we can see that you like it or anything like that, but it helps other people that may be looking for a teaching, may be interested in learning more about the scriptures. It's a simple way of improving the search algorithm for other people so that the word can go forward. We don't, it's nice that you would like this, but like it for the reason of that it could be shared. And if you really like this, then share it with somebody. Share it with a friend that you know it will bless, especially in this season of Hanukkah. Spread the light. Shine your light before men.
All right. With that brings us to the end. Thank you so much, Gary. That's a pleasure doing it with you, and great word. Until next time, everybody, we're on a cliffhanger, so we'll see you next week.